I sometimes hear people say, "Boy, I would never want to go back to my junior high years." And I I actually had some really fun, great experiences as a junior high kid. I had three or four really good friends they were just good guys, and we didn't get into any trouble. We were good. There was tons of peer pressure. When you're an early adolescent like that, you don't have experience, you don't have enough data, you don't know how to filter all of those things, and the peer pressure can just be incredibly difficult and heavy. And yet, God was so good to me because of the friends that I had. And I honestly didn't experience peer pressure to do stupid and wrong things. There are a lot of people who can't say that, though. And through their junior high, high school, college experiences, the peer pressure that they experienced was negative in so many ways. I think in a lot of ways, you never get past having to deal with peer pressure. I'm 67 years old, and there are times when I still feel peer pressure to try and be somehow as good as, or comparing myself in terms of my income and status and career development and tons of educational levels, and it's just nutty. For whatever reason, God made us capable of experiencing and transmitting that kind of pressure among ourselves and to others. I so I just write it off to our brokenness. I can't explain it in any other way. This is not a new phenomenon. It's as old. It's as old as mankind, really. In Peter's day, there was a thing. I don't think they called it peer pressure, but it existed, and he talks about it in First Peter chapter 4. He wrote about. It starts in the whole thing, all of chapter 4. There's no reason not to read it. Therefore, since Christ suffered in his body, arm yourself also with the same attitude, because whoever suffers in the body is done with sin. As a result, they do not live the rest of their earthly lives for evil human desires, but rather for the will of God. For you have spent enough time in the past doing what pagans choose to do, living in debauchery, lust, drunkenness, orgies, carousing, and detestable idolatry. And then he talks about peer pressure. They are surprised that you do not join them in their reckless, wild living, and they heap abuse on you. Well, that sounds a little bit like junior high and high school. I can't understand why you don't want to party with us. And then it goes past not understanding to they begin to ridicule, and I don't really remember anybody heaping abuse on me, but yeah, it happens. And in Peter's day, this idea that if I don't join you at what he calls this reckless and wild living, that not only would you be surprised, but then you would begin to heap abuse on me. Let's look at both Peter's day and our day. Peter's day, a lot of what he had described as this very broken lifestyle was parallel with was part and parcel with pagan worship. And Peter lived in a world, in the Greco-Roman world in century 1, Christianity had not overwhelmed yet the idolatry of the Romans and the Greeks. We think of it as mythology, and it is. It wasn't to them. It was their religion. I mean, they held this belief. I know to believe that there is a God in heaven who holds lightning bolts in his hand, throws it down on people, who occasionally comes down, has intercourse with human women, and they produce an offspring that becomes a lesser God. All of that, to me, it just doesn't make sense. Well, it made lots of sense to people in century 1. And the reason it made sense, I mean, there's many different reasons, but the primary reason is because they didn't know any better. This is the best they could do to explain what they saw happening in life. There must be something or someone or some ones who ordain and execute and cause things that I cannot explain. And so they made sacrifices to gods and goddesses of fertility and harvest and prosperity. And honestly, the way that they worshipped was, in addition to these offerings that they offered, was prostitution. Drunkenness was all a part of the thing, and the boundaries of morality were few and far between for them. Some cultures are harder to understand and explain than others. And I think as we read scriptures, we don't put it in its sociological and cultural and historic context. Peter was not writing to people who had a pretty decent life. He was writing to people whose life was hard every single day. And part of the reason that it was hard is because they had to stand as a tiny minority against a vast majority that didn't hold the same values. And not only did they not hold the same values, why they were surprised that Christians wouldn't join them in all of these wild and what he calls them reckless behaviors, is that that was the standard. But it went beyond that. It wasn't just that they were surprised that these Christian people were not joining them, but it went all the way to being ridiculed, to this kind of abuse. There are probably some people in our culture here in America who have had abuse heaped on them because they wouldn't join with others. I'm sure. I have friends who were part of Greek life in their college days, and they stood firm with their values, and I know they must have been ridiculed or made fun of at the very least because they were such a prude. Well, that's like the front porch. That's not even in the house of the kind of abuse that the Christians of century 1 experienced, because they living out the faith and the values that they held because of Christ in their life. People today are surprised when you don't drink the Kool-Aid. You don't swallow the bait that more stuff will make you a bigger, better person, that more achievement will make you bigger and better, and all of the things that our culture, the world around us wants to push us into. And not all of that is evil. Okay? Education is not evil. Advancement and achievement is not evil. A certain amount of healthy ambition in your career, that's not evil. But when it becomes the idol and we worship at the altar, it is evil. Well, Peter goes on, they're surprised that you not join them in the reckless while living, and they heap abuse on you. But, okay, don't miss this. But they will have to give account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. We live in a culture that lacks accountability on the right things and has an abundance of accountability on some things that are distorted. It is possible to live your life almost unaccountable. I hear stories of bosses and CEOs and folks at the top of the food chain in the marketplace, in business, in a wide array of careers, who seem to be unaccountable to anyone. They just do what they want to do. They wreak havoc wherever they are, whatever the organization, whatever the culture, whatever the context. People are mauled and squashed, chewed up, ground out, and spit out by that kind of individual. They just do what they want to. And there are a lot of people who, if they have heard it, a lot of them haven't, but if they have heard that there will be an accounting before the one judge who is absolutely just and who knows every single thing about who they are and what they've done and why, they are oblivious to this. There are others who maybe have heard it, but they disregard it. You can be oblivious, you can disregard it, but it doesn't change the fact we will give an account. This is very important to me. This is where the importance of this, I guess, if I could say, why is that important to me? Here's the bottom line. There are people who have done things to me that were just not right. Sometimes they were accidental and unintentional, but there are other times when I have been wounded emotionally, gratefully, never physically, but emotionally, psychologically, even spiritually. There will come a time when they have to give an account for what they did. You look around at the world, at all of the inequity. You look around at the world and you see all of the wrong things that are happening, and the people that are being empowered to do these wrong things. There will come a time when every one of us and them will give an account. Or you can take that and you can tease it out, and you have to. I mean, you have to think about, okay, what are the implications of that? If I'm going to face accountability for my behaviors, then one of the things that ought to happen is I give thought to my behaviors, right? See, this is one of the things about, in my experience, helping people on their journey from addiction to freedom. I don't know anybody who made that journey well without accountability, without somebody in their life who asked them at regular intervals and early on in the process, at more than once a day, and sometimes almost by the hour, are you clean? And they knew they had to give an account, made their decision-making process very different. When I know I have to give an account, I'll give you, for instance, years ago, I had one of the great gifts of my life was being in an accountability group with 3 other guys who I knew well enough to know I could trust them. And our big thing that we were accountable to each other on was, were we keeping, were we, there's no delicate way to say this, we all struggled with pornography. And every Wednesday, we sat in this circle and asked one another, have you looked at anything that you shouldn't have looked at? Knowing that I was going to be asked that question, and that these guys had pretty good crap detectors, it deterred me. I had the urge and thought, I don't want to have to tell them I screwed up. So there is that. My time's up, and I got a lot more I'd like to say about that giving account thing. So I'm going to come back to it, and we'll talk more about it and think more about it. But I'm done for today, and grateful that you tuned in for So Care with Stevie Boy. I hope I get to see you next time.